Yeah, 5 buds.
I saw that. Put the signs down.
Are we live?
Say it.
Hmm?
My goodness.
Mm.
Official one. Twice. 2 days.
Yeah,
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It is 6:58, so we'll just wait 2 more minutes, and then we'll start the meeting. Oh, 6:59. Oh, I'm so grateful for my coffee. Huh?
You amended to 1 minute.
Like to amend, I don't want to amend it. Okay, so I'd like to call the regular meeting of council for September 13th, 2022 to order at 6:59 p.m. By the time the meeting starts, it will be 7. So welcome everyone. Great to see a full house. Great to see the staff that are here this evening. Thank you for coming. We are creeping into the fall, but we live in Mirage and it's going to be beautiful. So. Okay, so we do have, for our information purposes, we do have our strategic priorities chart there in place for quarter 2, 2022. And it is 7 p.m. Okay, it just turned. Okay, so are there any late items that need to be added to the formal agenda presented this evening? No? Okay, could I please ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
With the additions.
With the, oh yeah, there's additions in camera that we've added that have already been added to the agenda. They're indicated there.
Okay, also move.
Okay, do we
I'll
have a
second.
seconder? Okay. Motion is passed. Taking a look at the minutes from August 16th, 2022. Are there any amendments to the minutes? Is there any business arising from the minutes?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is passed. Yes?
Oh, we're just gonna vote on it.
Yeah, okay. All right, do we have to vote on it?
All in favor,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right, sorry, it's been a while. I'm like, okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say nay. Motion is passed. Okay. Delegations and public hearings is next. We have a delegation this evening. Welcome to our delegation. We have Justin Ellis joining us in regards to our Parks and Open Spaces Master Plan from RC Strategies. Justin, we are all
Good evening. Sorry, Madam Mayor, were you calling on me to go? I assume you
Yeah.
can hear me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Terrific. All right, well, thank you very much, Madam Mayor and Council, for having me on tonight and giving me a bit of time to present and introduce you to the draft Parks and Trails Master Plan that we've been working on for the past year. I'm going to make a presumption in speaking with the administration that you can see the presentation or the administration has the presentation up for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can see it now. Okay, great. So I'm just going to advise when we want them to switch the slides there. So if we could move forward to the agenda slide. In our brief time that we have here this evening, I understand we have about 30 minutes or so, we really want to take the time to introduce you to the purpose of the plan. We know you've had it for a few days, but our assumption is that you haven't had a chance to digest it wholeheartedly, potentially. So we want to walk through a little bit about the purpose of the master plan, talk about our engagement process that we ran and what we heard through that engagement process. In addition to the engagement, talk a little bit about the research and analysis that we did to inform the recommendations in the master plan. And then, with the time that we have, introduce you to the plan, its structure, and some of the things that we've recommended. We won't have time to get into all of the details and visit all of the actions that we've identified within the plan, but I'm hoping to hit some of the high points with you this evening. And then opening up to questions and discussion that you may have. So with that next slide. So we initiated the planning process last year in June when we launched the engagement process. And it was done in parallel with the Uniplex study that our team has also led with administration, and that'll be forthcoming to you here shortly. The purpose of the plan, as we've laid out, is to provide a long-term strategic framework to guide your decision-making on the development it's not a detailed design plan for individual parks. It's strategic in nature to try and align the town in the direction you're taking with Parks and Trails with best practices, with what we heard the priorities are of the community, et cetera, and provide that direction going forward over a long term. The next 20 or so years is what we were asked to look at. The plan itself, it provides an inventory and evaluation of the current state of your parks and trails in the town. It presents, as I mentioned, the community interests and priorities as we heard them through the engagement process. And it sets forward a set of desired outcomes, which are really the reason that you are investing. They're the things you want to achieve, and they're the reason you're investing public resources in your parks and trail system. And it outlines and prioritizes the strategies and the actions that the town will or could focus on with its partners over the next 20 years. Next slide. So the engagement process that we ran for the Parks and Trails master planning was done in unison with the Uniplex study. And our goal through the engagement process was to ensure that the process would allow anybody that had an interest in the future of your parks and trails, as well as the Uniplex, a meaningful opportunity to help inform the plan and share their input and thoughts. We know the residents are very passionate about your parks and trail system. We heard that very clearly through the engagement. So we set out to implement an engagement process that used a range of different approaches and tactics to allow people that might prefer to take part online to do so, to take part in person to do so, etc. We think from our experience, working across Western Canada, that the participation for your community was a reasonable participation in the process. And we received, the tactics that we utilized included the online survey, which was also available in hard copy for pickup from the town for anybody that wanted to fill it in hard copy. We used and launched an online interactive mapping tool where people could drag and drop input directly on the parks, on the individual trails, on the individual assets within the parks, and share their input on what exists currently, and the ability to draw new lines and drop new points of where they thought maybe new parks should be, new trails, connections, etc. And we also implemented a youth questionnaire survey, and staff worked with a number of individuals involved with the schools, the local schools, to help get that questionnaire out and filled in by some youth in the community. And we held 13 different stakeholder group meetings, including a session with a number of council members. So as you can see there, we had 232 survey responses submitted, 104 different points and pieces of input and likes provided in the online crowdsource tool. We had 48 youth questionnaires submitted to us, and as I mentioned, we did 13 different stakeholder group meetings. So the engagement process did start in June of last year, and it ran through the end of July, in case anybody hasn't had a chance to review what we heard report. We go to the next slide. So the question obviously is what did we hear through the process? And just before I dive into some of the key themes, I just want to reiterate, we only have the ability this evening to hit some of the high-level themes that emerged. There is a what we heard report that I believe was submitted to you with the council package, along with the plan, and that what we heard report goes into more detail on the results from the survey, what we heard specifically through the online crowdsource mapping, what we heard through the youth survey and the stakeholder workshop. So much more detail available there. But in general, we heard, and as I've mentioned already, your parks and your trails, they did emerge as very important assets to your community, and as I'm sure you're well aware, they're highly important and essential to the quality of life, to the health and the well-being of your residents. We asked a little bit about barriers to participation and enjoyment of your parks and your trails, and we heard that awareness, the quality of the parks and trails, and the simple availability of time were some of the biggest barriers to participation. A few of those things, of course, we can focus on in the plan, and we have. Others, such as availability of individuals' time, not so much in control of the town, obviously, but we definitely looked at awareness and quality as key things to address in the plan. We heard that residents, or at least the participants that took part in the engagement process, are relatively satisfied with the current Parks and Trails system. But they had a number of suggestions, and they clearly identified there was a need to improve the maintenance and condition of your existing parks and trails, to enhance the universal accessibility and inclusivity of your parks and your trails, to expand, to connect, and to diversify your parks and trail system, to diversify the outdoor recreation facilities that are provided within the park system, to look at activating our parks and trails and how we can drive more people to your parks and trails, motivate more visitation to them through programming. And we heard a desire to see an improvement in and a consistent provision of comfort and convenience amenities such as benches, picnic tables, washrooms, those types of things. And then the fourth main theme that came out of the engagement was around focusing on how we can improve perceptions of safety in parks and trails, whether it be through the presence of staff or bylaw officers or policing, or through design of your parks and trails system. So improving safety emerged as a key topic and focus. We jump to the next slide. In addition to engagement and what we heard, in our world as planners, we take that input as being demands from the community, what the community wants to see. But we always look at and supplement the demands of the community with some additional research and analysis to make sure that what's being asked for emerges as a need. So some of that research and analysis that you'll see in there is a review of the latest trends as it relates to recreation trails, a review of current higher order policies and plans that are associated with the parks and recreation sector, provincially, nationally, regionally, etc. And we also undertook some research and analysis specific to your community. And in regards to that, we really set out to try and understand, before we started thinking about the future of your parks and trail system, we really wanted to understand how much park space and trails do you currently have? What is the general condition of your parks and your trails? Do you have enough parks and trails to meet the needs of your citizens? And do your residents have equitable access to them? And then the last kind of key research question that we always look at is, do your residents have access to a diversity of parks and trail, basically outdoor recreation opportunities? So to answer those questions, we spent time last year in going around your parks and all your trails, getting an understanding of what's there and their condition, doing the field-based inventories and assessments and desktop-based inventories and assessments. And then we used GIS, which is short for Geographic Information Systems, to provide some spatial analytics and insights on your provisioning of parks and your supply, your residents' access to parks, and the equity through which those parks and trails are distributed in your community. So you're going to see a good deal of that. You're going to see all of that information and those insights summarized in the master plan. But I wanted to touch on a few of the findings here this evening with you. So if we go to the next slide. So starting with parks, we found that you have 13 parks and the equivalent of about 73 hectares of park space in the community. But when we looked at that more closely, about 81% of that park supply is associated with the fairgrounds, or what we're calling your natural spaces, your open spaces within the community. It represents about 4% of your town land base, and one of the measures that's used, and it's not the only measure, it shouldn't be the only measure that's used, but for comparisons across communities, an indicator that is really trying to calculate the amount of hectares per 1,000 people, residents, is utilized. And so we also looked at that. We found that you had about 4.6 hectares per 1,000 people in your of supply in your community. And so what that means is, when we compare that across other jurisdictions in Canada, the amount of park space that you're providing right now is generally in keeping with the major comparator cities. Unfortunately, there's no benchmarking available for smaller towns such as La Ronge. So these numbers we're comparing against are from the City Parks report from more major urban centers. But by and large, you're sitting at around the average for what major Canadian cities are providing across Canada. Our analysis shows that park space is generally meeting expectations. This is our conclusions, not necessarily what we heard, but it's supported by what we heard from the engagement. But that the condition of your parks are in a state of decline. They're aging, of course, and they probably won't remain as meeting expectations, for the lifespan of this plan. When we looked at the infrastructure and amenities, we found, and again, this wasn't a detailed asset management level life cycle assessment of all of your amenities within your parks and trail system. But in general, from our observations, they appear to be reaching the end of their life cycle and will need replacement in the lifespan of the planned horizon that we were looking at. Our spatial analytics through GIS did suggest that while you have a comparable amount of park space, the park space isn't necessarily equitably distributed throughout your community. And when we looked at that at the dissemination area level to see where we had how well the park space was distributed around the town. And we found that the diversity of, the access to a diversity of recreation opportunities was limited. Some other insights we had, and we had to rely on staff opinion and expertise on this, was around utilization of your bookable outdoor sport facilities. And so there was no booking data available to us to do our own quantitative analysis on, but staff have indicated that the town-owned fields and diamonds tend to be underutilized, and a lot of the activities are happening on rectangular fields, etc., happening over on the schools assets, and those assets aren't yet expanded or being utilized beyond their current capacity. And then the final finding that we had as a planning team was around universal accessibility. We heard that from the community as being a priority, and we found that as well with our analysis. There's opportunity and a need to look at the universal accessibility and inclusivity of our parks and trail spaces. So we go to the next slide. Some of the key findings related to trails is we have about 26.9 kilometers of trails in the community is what we've mapped and pulled together. Of that, about 85% of them are for non-motorized use, and the remaining 15%, which equates to about 4 kilometers, showed obvious evidence of mixed use, so combining motorized and non-motorized use. We found there's an opportunity to improve the connectivity of the trail system. There's opportunities to improve access to the trails through new designated trail beds, as well as a couple bullets down, looking at how we can enhance trailheads with comfort, convenience, amenities, signage, and information about the trails and use of the trails. There's opportunity to continue to diversify the types of trails as well as the levels of difficulty or challenge levels. And you can see in the graph in the bottom that right now, if we look at the standard classification of trails based on their level of difficulty, which, if you're familiar, kind of runs from a green, kind of like a ski hill rating. It runs from a green up to a double black in terms of the most challenging. We see, which is what we want to see, the highest proportions in the green and the blue, because that's where most people are. But we see very little trails in the black or double black diamond levels of difficulty, and there's opportunity to ensure progression of people's abilities and skills by having a little bit more supply in the more challenging levels of trail experience. We also found that there's your trail conditions we've heard and we saw are improving in terms of their sustainability, but there's still a number of issues that remain on your existing trails, and an opportunity to continue to work with your very dedicated trail partners to improve that trail sustainability. And deliberate management of motorized use. It was clear, I deal a lot with motorized recreation, with provincial agencies and regional agencies across Western Canada, and it was very clear that you've got a lot of motorized use happening within the community, and there's opportunity, if desired, to create some designated routes and trails to help manage some of that random motorized use. So with that, we'll jump to the next slide, which is really the introduction of the plan. We spent a very few moments talking about what we heard through the engagement, and the key themes. We talked a little bit about what we found through our analyses that we've done, and now I want to talk to you a little bit about how the plan is structured and some of the plan content. So this graphic here shows you basically the structure of what I call the plan components. So it's not the background research, not the overview of what we heard, it's the actual steps going forward. So we've developed a set of desired outcomes, which really are articulating what we want to achieve and what we want to be different by investing in parks and trails in the community. We've laid out a set of principles, which are really the fundamental concepts or truths that will guide decision-making around parks and trails into the future. And we've laid out a series of strategies and actions. Those strategies are really the higher level key focus areas that we think you really need to, you will benefit in focusing on, and that'll help you make good strides towards achieving the outcomes. And then the actions are more tangible and specific tasks that could be implemented over the planning horizon by the town or by the town in partnership with your partners. So with that understanding of the I guess the structure of the plan, if we go to the next slide, we'll see here the plan at a glance. And you'll see the topics that the desired outcomes are focused around. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. I know it's the text a little small there. But we're really, through investing in parks and trails, we're really trying to help deliver and ensure we have active public citizens. We want to ensure that our environmentally and culturally important areas are protected within the town. We want to ensure inclusive and equitable outdoor recreation for all of your residents and visitors that are coming to the town. We want to use parks and trails to help celebrate La Ronge and its very diverse history and the things that make La Ronge unique. We want to make sure our trails and our parks are helping to support climate change adaptation and resilience. We want to ensure that they're helping us advance truth and reconciliation with First Nations. And one of our other desired outcomes we've outlined is to really use our parks and trails investments to help strengthen our partnerships and collaboration and delivery of our parks and trails system. So I won't go into detail. There's a bunch of more detailed statements around what it is we're trying to achieve, but those are the general topics that we've outlined in this plan. You can see the topics around the principles, which in the interest of time tonight I'm not going to dive into, but as well the principles are laid out there and should hopefully provide a bit of a touchstone when staff and yourselves are making decisions about your parks and trails. Is it aligned with the principles? Is that decision aligned with the outcomes? Will it help contribute to the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And then we've organized our strategies and our actions into three kind of bins, if you will. As you can see here, we've got a set of park-specific strategies and actions. We've got a set of trail-specific strategies and actions. And then we have a set of overarching strategies and actions that apply to parks and trails. So I organized it that way because a lot of the topics in the overarching that we would be in the actions we were recommending were directly relevant to parks and to trails, and we just didn't want to repeat them in both sections of the plan and make it longer than it already is. So in total, just seeing where I'm at here with my 25 minutes or so of presentation time, in total we've recommended 16 strategies to focus on. Those are 16 focus areas for the town over the next 20 or so years. There's 8 overarching strategies, and then there's 4 park-specific strategies and 4 trail-specific strategies. And maybe I'll just touch on the parks and the trail-specific strategies and give you a couple of examples of the actions that are in there right now at the time that I have. So one of the, focus again on park-specific strategies, we've recommended a strategy to expand the supply of recreation-focused parks. And this is really about and focused on creating some additional park space, recreation-focused park space over time, and ensuring that the park space remains sufficient with your population growth. So we've identified actions such as clear targets to achieve in the amount of park space to try and retain. We've provided direction on future siting and identification of potential future opportunities to designate new recreation-focused park space that will deal with some of the gaps that we have in the community. We've identified the potential, and we heard this through a number of individuals we interviewed and engaged with, the potential to look at Fire Break as a potential new recreation-focused park, and the opportunity to look at perhaps an OHV or an off-highway vehicle motorized recreation adventure kind of play park and skills park. Maybe at the fairgrounds is where we've signaled an opportunity there. And also not to just look at park space as something that's permanent, but think about and pursue opportunities for what we see in other jurisdictions, which is temporary pop-up parks that maybe come in for a summer, or they come in for a week in an unused lot, or some open parking spaces on the main street through town, et cetera, but looking at these fun temporary pop-up parks. The next strategy that we've recommended is to focus on protecting environmentally and culturally important areas within the town. And this really works to recognize that even at the municipal level, the town has a role in achieving national conservation mandates and ensuring that ecologically and culturally important areas are protected through the park system. So we've recommended actions such as mapping of environmentally significant areas within the town and within your individual parks, so we understand where those actually are. Formally dedicating conservation-focused parks as actual park space and classified as a natural space park, as we've laid out in the plan in the new classification system. And working with First Nations to identify and understand where the culturally important areas are, so that if it's appropriate, those can be integrated into the park system and celebrated and protected appropriately. The next strategy we've identified under parks is to enhance and diversify the existing parks system, and this is really focused on improvements to what you have now and diversification of the recreation opportunities within the town. So we've recommended the development of design guidelines, so we enhance the consistency in the supply and what's provided for your parks, and particularly your parks amenities. We've heard clearly and recommended consideration and evaluation of a potential spray park in the community and identify the location for that. We've recommended considering relocating the bike park, and some of that's going to have to do with what happens with the Uniplex. But certainly locating that bike park closer to where all the mountain bike trails are would be beneficial and in line with what we see happening in a lot of communities around the country right now. Undertaking playground safety audits and a playground renewal program. Your playgrounds are reaching the end of their life, and I'm not sure the last time that they've had an audit done on them, but making sure that those things are taken care of is some of the actions that we've identified. And in that, we've recommended for your two kind of signature parks or destination parks, undertaking development plans for Patterson and Morley. That would be an individual process focused specifically on that park and Morley as well, where it would result in the future design of that park. We've provided in the plan in the appendix a number of park-by-park recommendations. So that's there and available on what we heard and what we're recommending. But it requires additional design and design process to figure out exactly what is feasible within those sites. And then the final strategy we recommend within parks is the greening of parks and park operations. So that's focused exactly on what it is working to mitigate the undesirable impacts of use of our parks, the design of our parks, as well as our park operations on environmental values. In terms of trail-specific strategies and actions, we've recommended first strategy we've recommended is connecting the trail or the active transportation network within the community. And this is really focused on expanding your current trail system to address the gaps in connectivity. So new opportunities along the highway corridor that came out loud and clear through the engagements. Connections from the neighborhoods to downtown came out clear, as well as connections from the neighborhood to other town destinations. So our map and the recommendations do signal some of the the key gaps to pursue, in order to enhance that connectivity. We've recommended the strategy of enhancing your current trail system. Tremendous work being done in the community by your trail partners. Really impressive work being done there. Some of the things to support those efforts that we've recommended is creating clear, what we call trail management objectives. And though that form and the structure for that is laid out in the plan, in the appendix, but really being clear on the purpose, the intent, the permitted uses, etc., of each of your trails within your system. Utilizing and adopting existing design guidelines that exist, so formally adopting those and working with the trail partners to follow those guidelines. Expanding trailheads and staging areas and improving the amenities in them so we can get better access to our trail system for all of your residents. And we have a number of signage recommendations or actions identified in the plan as well. The next strategy related to trails was around diversification of the trail experience, and this is really focused on ensuring that you have a strong diversity of trail opportunities to meet the needs. So we've identified actions such as continuing to work with Bora to expand the mountain bike network and diversify, particularly some more challenging level trails that allow progression. Ensuring we've got some actual university accessible trails within the parks themselves and perhaps outside the parks for people that are looking to be active and outdoors regardless of their abilities. And even this idea of thinking about whether a water trail could be developed off of the waterfront, connecting to the provincial park in the islands just off the shoreline. And then the final strategy that we've identified specific to trails is building the capacity of trail partners. Your partners are putting in a tremendous amount of effort, which again, I gotta congratulate them and you folks for the work you're doing supporting them. But it's really about deepening and supporting the ability of your community volunteers to continue to support trail development and trail management maintenance within the community. So we've signaled actions around the town taking a lead in ensuring, not necessarily providing directly, but ensuring and enabling training on trail development, trail management, trail design. Looking at and considering the provision of operational grants and consistently dependable grant each year to the trail groups that they can use to support their operations, and supporting those groups with the actual pursuit of and preparation of grants to other funding programs, other levels of government, etc. So with that, I just want to recognize that there's still a series of overarching strategies and action that deal in more detail with inclusion and leisure education and universal accessibility, truth and reconciliation. But in our time, I'm just not able to hit on all of those. So I elected to focus specifically on the parks and trails specific recommendations. So if we can go to the next slide. Not going to spend any time with this one, but this is, if you haven't had a chance to look at the plan yet, this is in the plan that supports, it's a map that supports kind of a future concept, and it takes some of the major capital and initiatives that we identified as actions and just lays them out spatially. It identifies some potential new trail connections, some potential new park locations to consider, signal some of the major development planning for Patterson and Morley, et cetera, the OHD Adventure Park to consider. This map really just tries to spatialize and answer the question of, well, where are we talking about? So it's just a visual to support all the text. So the next slide, what I want to hit for you is, before I bring this to a conclusion here, it's just a little bit about the implementation and prioritization that we did. In talking with staff, we felt like, you know, there's a list of actions, strategies and actions that we've identified. It's not a random list, it's a deliberate list. It follows what we heard from the community, it follows what our analysis suggests to us and what best practices suggest to us. But we wanted to prioritize those actions for you in some way. We do believe all of those actions we have identified are important to do, but to help give you starting point of what do we start with? What's the potentially biggest bang, biggest return for our efforts? We developed a prioritization system. So there's 9 weighted criteria that we use to determine the relative priority of each of the actions. So we asked ourselves, to what extent is the action supported and identified by community engagement? We weighted that with a 3. The 3 is the highest weighting. To what extent would the action help drive meaningfully change towards the outcomes that we've identified in the plan? That was weighted with a 3. To what extent is this action advancing public good? So what we mean by public good, and it's outlined in the plan, is that the investment will benefit everybody, there's likely to benefit everybody in the community, either directly or indirectly, rather than just benefiting a very small specific interest group or sport group that may or may not have big representation within the community. So public good was there. We asked ourselves to what extent our site analysis confirmed that the action should be implemented. We asked ourselves to what extent the action aligns with the trends that we've summarized in the plan. To what extent it'll support inclusion, advancing inclusion and accessibility, which we think is a really important topic and consideration. And then we took into account, very high level. We didn't do any costing on this. This is a strategic plan, but we considered, the magnitude of the capital costs associated with implementing the action, as well as the operating costs associated with implementing the action. And then recognizing that you're a service hub for a lot of northern Saskatchewan, we also wanted to think about to what extent the action we're recommending might help generate a return on the investment, bringing new travelers in or whatever the case might be to the community. So the results of that, when we added those scores all up, allowed us to rank. Again, it's just a relative ranking. Rank the actions based on whether they're high, moderate, or low priority. So the next slide is just a screenshot of the implementation prioritization table, and you can see there it's got the strategy identified, the numbers in the column that say action rather than listing out all of the words again. They're just associated with the numbers in the plan. And then you can see the scores that we've been given for each of those criteria, and the end result of what we think is high, moderate, or low priority for implementing. So with that, the next slide there, yes, I'll wrap up and thank you very much for, again, for the opportunity to work with your community, learn from your community, and share some of our experience and as we kind of co-created the development of this master plan. And I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or discussion.
I just want to say thanks for putting that together. To me, as a planner, it makes a lot of sense to me how you've organized this, and I really appreciate the data provided and breakdown on the maps, because we've got a few planning exercises that are going to be coming up in our 10-year capital planning and things like that. So having that better understanding of the analysis, the land use analysis around which neighborhoods actually have access and which do not is, I think, for me, probably the biggest benefit of this plan. Also being able to identify both from stakeholders and your own analysis about what might be our more higher priority needs in our parks. I appreciate it that it's codified guidance for both council and administrative decision making to be able to kind of forge ahead and create quality spaces for recreation in our community. So thanks.
Any more questions from the floor?
I do. On the previous slide, 2 questions and discussion here. You said in the action you have them labeled out 1 through up to 16. And you said that you can find that reflected into the plan. Can you tell me where?
Yeah, so if you find the strategy that's listed in the plan, they expand, so that's under the parks specifically. If we take number 1 there as an example on the top of the table. So to expand our supply of recreation-focused park space, if you go to that strategy in the document itself, each of the actions we've recommended are numbered, and so the number 1 in the action is relevant to the first action in the plan under that strategy. Hopefully that's not too convoluted. If I could share my screen, I could show you that.
That's
am I
first
able
one's
to share my screen?
Gotcha.
52.
So,
Gotcha.
Councillor Herdisky?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you would have a capital cost and operating cost at such a low priority. And it's, you know, especially when we got lots of competing, things to accomplish in our community, and cost is always on the forefront.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I had a hard time hearing that question. Was a little muffled. Are you able to repeat it?
I said in there, on your list of priorities, you have the capital cost and operating cost as the number 1, which is low in priority. And with all the challenges we have to deliver services in the community, I would think that should be a little higher than that, I don't know.
Okay, fair point for sure. Thank you for that comment. My rationale in weighting it at a 1 is because the capital cost certainty, like I didn't engage a landscape architect or an architect to cost these out, or an engineer to cost out the technical feasibility of implementing these. So we just used, our understanding of the relative cost. So I didn't want to put a huge amount of weight in it because those actual costs aren't known. That said, it is relatively easy to adjust the weighting and update that if that's council's desire.
Just to comment on that too, I think the fact that the plan has some criteria and a bit of a weighting system, I think that we certainly, when we do the 10-year capital plan, if we found you wanted to weight certain criteria differently as we were evaluating the proposed initiatives, when we get specific, we could at least take that metrics and then play with it a bit internally.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? No? Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Ellis, and for your time and for your detail and precision in terms of presenting the Parks and Open Spaces master plan to us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council. Good luck. We'll talk with you soon.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Moving on to correspondence. We have some correspondence regarding Reconciliation Bridge. Coming from the village of Air Ronde. Do we have any questions around that, or?
I would make a motion that this council support the initiative of naming the bridge Reconciliation Bridge and sign the letter with the rest of the tri-community.
Okay, do we have a seconder around that?
I'll second that.
Okay, open for discussion. Any further discussion on this item or amendments?
Just a comment that it would be nice if we're going to rename the bridge that we also get a new bridge with it and upgrades to building that
So is
with,
that
with some fair. It's more of a comment,
more
but
comment, not an amendment? Okay.
not an amendment.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if we can have a vote in regards to this motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say nay. Okay, motion is carried. Moving on to the next item, Robertson Drive Park request. Any questions or additional information on that?
I would consider this feedback into what we just went over with the recreation parks, and if I would like to have this directed to that plan and be incorporated with that.
Okay,
Personally, I know.
Councillor Herdisky?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to have a park in that area because there's nothing really close by there. Sacrificing something that's already being serviced, I think we gotta weigh it out a little bit. Maybe we can find something that hasn't been serviced in the vicinity that wouldn't cost as much or have a financial impact of that. So I think that could be part of a bigger discussion.
In the parks plan that we just heard of, there's a suggested area in behind there that's still a treat area for a park in their suggestions anyway. But like Councillor McPhail said too, I think it should be added to the list of discussion points when we're planning parks in the future.
Okay. Councillor Bashar?
So the Parks Plan analysis did, from what I read, support that this area is underserviced by parks, which, you know, is apparent. As the area gets built out, those planning discussions will have to be had as we further subdivide the area, and I'm pretty sure in our long-term plan, in our OCP and zoning bylaw, there are areas designated down the road within that interior parcel as it gets subdivided. And every subdivision that happens, just as a reminder to everybody, that every subdivision that happens in our community for residential purposes, 10% of that, either land or cash in lieu of land, gets put into a specific fund that funds capital for recreation, either purchasing land or putting capital improvements on that land. So as you know, administration finds those opportunities to come forward with recommendations as to like what our parks need and where, based on the plans and things like that, we can definitely look at that and, you know, the balance in that that lands fund that we have, and go from there. But I'm pretty sure as we get further along in this process and all these plans start kind of actually getting implemented, there will be a really nice clear path forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vetri?
I'm just trying to recall that that section on Robertson Drive there was talk about even having trouble selling that because of the size and shape of it, right?
As referenced in
Agriculture.
Wilson Bedrock, I think that's the tougher sell.
So it would be a good area for a park if nothing else could be built on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it
Could
a
be that the
sufficient park if it's
services
full of
already
bedrock?
get put into it too, so if it can be used at a, maybe we've got to sell them at a little bit more discount.
Maybe somebody wants to put a
grain
tiny
because-
home on it, or
Yeah,
amalgamated
there's
into
still
it,
options there, and it's
yeah.
already serviced, so we don't want to
Okay.
throw that away.
Okay, so do we have a motion on the table around this?
I'll make a motion to
correspondence?
refer the document to the master parks plan.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? No? Okay, let's take a vote on that motion. All in favor say aye. Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Just a comment, just to be clear, how we're, as administration, we intend to proceed based on the general comments around the table, and the motion is, again, we're developing the 10-year capital plan, we have the master plan. We know that this is an area where a neighborhood park would be serviced. We'll come back with initiatives from the master plan, including a neighborhood park for this area and some recommendations around options and costing, what that would look like.
Thank you very much.
That being said too, maybe we consider something along the lines as if an individual is willing to build that park and fund it, then maybe we
Okay.
can entertain something with the land.
All right.
I'm thinking as well,
Councillor Vetri?
you know, with it being serviced and everything, you know, splash park or something like that, even there, a little water park or something, right? Possible.
So those are just comments that can be added to that cash
Kingsman
that
Water
motion,
Park.
that
Kingsman
possibility is.
England Village.
Okay, so moving on to committee of the whole,
I'll move to enter into committee of the whole.
okay, do we have a seconder for
I'll
that
second the
motion?
motion.
All right, any discussion around that? Okay, all in favor say aye,
Aye.
all opposed say nay. Okay, motion is carried, and we will move into committee of the whole. Moving into committee of the whole, I want us to consider potentially, this is a concern that's been brought forward by a few residents. There is a tree area that is sort of a triangle between the back of East Crescent fences, okay, the Uniplex, and adjacent to the school, okay? There has been a lot of activity during the day and at night. I was just actually texted a photo by someone of a fire happening in that area at this moment. You guys probably can't see it, and the request is for us to consider thinning that area, and I will share further details around incidences that have occurred during our in-camera portion. So, I guess there is no motion that's required for this. I guess it's a sharing of information for us and for the public in terms of its community safety concern for that specific piece of land that we own, I imagine, right? Okay.
So would the solution be to clear cut that?
Well, I think it would look really ugly if we got rid of every tree. I feel like thinning the
thin out.
trees might be a better option, especially if we're looking at trail systems.
To that parcel?
Yes.
So the only thing that I would have concern with is, I think thinning the area is 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. For the reason being, if it's not well lighted, then it's an awesome opportunity for kids or people that are probably not having the best intentions to walk along and have a clear view into backyards all along those areas as well. So it can provide a bit of a barrier to getting people to those areas. So, I mean, if we're looking at a crime reduction strategy of areas in the area, or just trying to have unwanted occupants out of those areas, maybe just forwarding this on to the RCMP and letting them know that there's a higher activity in the area and allowing them to police that.
Yeah, they're aware. They are very aware, and I feel that the residents are actually, that did come from one of the residents that backs into that area, where thinning it out is a suggestion that was made. And it's not so much people sleeping there, living there, or staying there, it's the activities that are happening there at various times, such as, the fire that's being put out right now, right? So, but I will share more details and specifics in camera, just to respect everyone's privacy.
I think one deterrent is definitely is lighting, and we
Uh-huh.
should maybe get administration to do the cost of what it would cost us to put lighting in that area too. But I think that would be somewhat addressing the problem.
I mean, as a person that isn't crazy far away from high school days, I remember walking through those trails quite a bit. I know that it was a good place to hide from authority, whether that be the teachers or whatever, if you were trying to do something that you probably didn't want to get caught. But having the opportunity to look at that area, and what I see is a decent opportunity, especially what we just reviewed in our master parks plan of that mountain bike park kind of moving to somewhere else. If we're going to do something in that area to try and there's two ways of getting unwanted traffic out of that area, and one is putting up barriers so people don't want to be in that area, and the other is putting enough attractants to that area that the unwanted company no longer wants to be in that area anymore either. So I think if we're going to look at something that can maybe serve as a win-win situation for Parks and Recreation around the Uniplex, as well as maybe some recreation opportunities for the high school, there might be an opportunity for partnership in that, and I think that could be something that we'd look at rather than just trying to thin the trees out.
And I know that the high school has multiple trails kind of
In and around.
in and around there that they use for PE and stuff like that. And there's obviously, like, when you look at a maps image, there's specific trails cut through there. As soon as the snow flies and it gets too cold, the activity gonna disappear?
Yeah.
So is this just happening since school started?
No,
No?
no, and I'll share those details in camera. And I'm sure that it may have come to the council table at prior councils, I'm not actually sure, but I will share further details in camera.
Edwin?
Yeah, just from our perspective, it's not the only complaints of unwanted activity all along the back of the arena is a common complaint area. The challenge is we're talking about probably in excess of 500 linear feet. That would be a whole lot of thinning and a whole lot of work. But I do want to have that discussion with council, and if we can come up with some creative ideas, then and thinning might be part of it strategically in some spots. But if we just thinned out the whole area, it's quite a lengthy stretch there from all the way from behind the bike park to where it ends by the high school parking lot.
If one of the initiatives of thinning, maybe it can be approached through the Fire Smart program when that
I thought
comes
about
through
that,
again.
but ideally I'd like to have that Fire Smart thinning used for disaster mitigation. I don't think it would be appropriate to use that type of fund.
Not for that reason, but if it was
Yeah.
identified anyway as a cause, and if there
Yeah.
been fires back there, there could be a little bit higher risk, so.
I've spoken to the SPSA and those aren't one of our areas of concern.
Okay.
And I mean, one of the other, considerations, and we'll probably be talking about this on other issues too, is sometimes you just push the problem to an adjacent area, and we have nothing but forested area across the street from the high school and behind the fire and behind the hospital, all that area, and if we make it unattractive there, are they just going to relocate into those areas? These are all things that we gotta think about, but it's not an easy issue, and we'll definitely need to give it some thought.
That's
No,
where
for sure.
that's where I was referencing the win-win is like if we're gonna be putting a bunch of investment or resources towards it, maybe we can get something out of it. So
Okay, so moving on, we'll talk about that a little bit more in camera. Moving on to 6.3, which is the 2023 budget process. There is a request for direction here from administration where there are 3 specific questions or key questions that we have been asked to address. Those key questions being, does the proposed budget schedule fit with council's expectations for the budget process? Does council have any concern or questions regarding the major operating budget assumptions? And are there any other items council wishes to discuss regarding the budget process? Yeah, sorry, Councilor Herdisky, sorry.
Yeah, I like the way it's laid out, like we've never had that kind of a lead up to the budget and even anticipation of budget happening before the end of the year. So that's very encouraging and it does give us time to contribute to the budget process. It's gonna start with the departments, it'll come forward and then, at the end, we're gonna have to decide on the major stuff, which direction we're going, but I like it the way it's laid out, it's very good.
I think it's great that it's laid out to be done before the end of the year too, which has never happened previously.
Yeah, we obviously had some challenges with some of our, and again, some of that was staff shortages at the wrong time of year last year, but certainly it'll allow us to get on top of tendering at the more timely time of year.
We really wanna hit the ground running on January 1st, so that it's business as usual, we're not waiting and stuck waiting for a budget to come out or anything
Waiting
like
till
that.
March to know what the budget is.
Yeah, so.
No, great work, everyone.
Thank you, team, because there's many of you
Mhm.
there. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to rise and report.
I'll move.
Okay, so we have a seconder. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to the next item, item number 7, bylaws. Again, we have a request for a decision regarding bylaw 670/22.
I'll move to give a third and final reading for the Fire and Emergency Services Bylaw 670/22 as presented.
Second.
Okay, perfect. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is Fire and Emergency Services Bylaw.
We just did that.
Doesn't
Oh, sorry,
Just
Appendix A.
Nope.
no, we've done all of that.
We did all of it? Okay.
Yeah, down to financial reports.
You get us not.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay,
Lana.
And here
Item
people
8.
wanted to have a
okay, do
big
we need to
spiel.
reword the motion? No, it's fine. Okay, financial reports, we have 3 financial reports, the budgetary control report, the accounts for approval report, the check reconciliation report.
I'll make a motion to receive and file the financial reports.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Any discussion on those items? No, all in favor say aye, anyone, yes, no, sorry, yes. Anyone opposed? No, motion is carried. 8.2, CRA removal of employees.
I'll make a motion that council remove Stephen Brown, Robbie Bender, Darian Parada, Colin Ratushniak, and Allison Richards from the Town of Ron CRA online business account.
Okay, seconder, okay. Any discussion on that item? No? Okay, all in favor please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is 8.3, long-term care facility fundraising. There's a request for decision.
I'm
and
gonna
a time.
declare a conflict of interest because I'm involved in that
Sure.
committee in a different capacity.
Councillor Clausen declares conflict at 7:59 p.m.
Evacuated, you know, and locked out too.
I'm gonna do the long way.
Okay, so moving on to the long-term care agreement fundraising campaign request for decision from council.
So this one is a little bit interesting for council, but certainly, you'll recall, prior to, there had been some, money that had been allocated for the, working with a consultant. That didn't proceed last year, and, we don't have those funds set aside now. However, they would like to go in a different direction that's maybe more flexible, and when the committee gets fully formed, if they wanna use those seed monies to start up, and they need some consultant help, or whether they look to hire someone part-time to do the work, or those kinds of things, or events planning and stuff before money starts coming in. So that's where this request is specifically coming from. But I also wanted to take the time, given that we are starting to commit funds to this initiative, that make sure that council's fully aware of the province's expectation around the fundraising goal and the agreement that we would be entering into with our partners, so that if there were shortfall in the end, ultimately we'd be responsible. Now, they have made the comment, of course, that they would work with us and they might scale in equipment, or maybe it would mean they would buy less, but all those would obviously impact the project in some way. So at the end of the day, they would need those funds to operate, and ultimately we would all jointly be responsible for meeting that goal. So I just want to make sure that council's aware, and you may have been debriefed fully by the minister or by the province before. I wasn't privy to that discussion, but provided that you're comfortable with that, then the administration's recommendation is to provide the seed money as requested.
Yep, we haven't been privy to any specific information. We may have had people attending meetings, but really nothing. I have no idea what our time frame is, how much time to completion is probably the time we have to leave the house. And my other point is, I noticed you got 1.95 million possible town contribution. When they look at the contribution, is anybody coming out of the far north? Or is it just basically the 4 to 5 million coming from the tri-community? Because it's a northern facility.
Correct. So just to the councilor's question, essentially the 4 to 5 million, which again they haven't pinned down yet, and they haven't finalized the template agreement. What we're doing right now is they asked the province for some information on the catchment area for the services for this facility. That's been provided to the Northern Saskatchewan Administrative District, so that they can give a population estimate, and then we will amend the percentages between the tri-communities and the district, and then it would be the 5 or 4 million, whatever it is, split up based on population survey.
Because we still got the outlying areas like the Napatats and the Eagle Point and those areas that are populated as well. So hopefully that's part of the formula.
Councilor Retry?
I remember they surveyed over there. Was the land ever given? So that's done. They said once they were given the land, they were breaking ground and starting to build fall of that year, and that still hasn't happened. But
Just in terms of updates, and we haven't been given anything firm or official from the province, but I have been on calls where they've talked about the land in behind there, and that some of the peat that they'd be looking to start removing to prep the site. They would like to do that in the fall because I guess with temperature just before it freezes, but as it's freezing is kind of the perfect time apparently to do that work. So I would expect some activity to start on that site in the fall and to continue on, and that kind of be the start of the construction of the project.
well, yeah, because they had mentioned they were going to do it last fall, so
Mhm.
that's why I was just inquiring about it. But anyways, I'll make that motion that council proceed with option A and rescind motion 2021-303 and approve the seed grant of $25,000 to a long-term care facility fundraising campaign.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion? Okay, seconded. Any further discussion on that motion?
I will discuss the motion. So I was in the role of deputy mayor at the time when this had kind of been announced that the town might be responsible for FF&E. Our then CAO, Steve Brown, myself, and Colin were on a call with the province as well as Tri-Community Leadership, their CAOs and whatnot, and executive director from the Lac Range Indian Band, where we discussed the project and who would be funding it. We did bring up many of the points that you brought up, Councillor Hudisky, where this is not La Range's long-term care facility, that based on the long-term care placement policies within the Saskatchewan Health Authority, this is the province's long-term care facility. Anyone can be placed in La Range, just like anyone right now in La Range that has long-term care needs can be placed anywhere in the province, from Estevan to Duck Lake to wherever. So that was one of the key points that we brought up, is that if this is going to serve the entirety of the province, then it should come from the entirety of the province to fundraise all parts of this, which kind of fell flat. There wasn't a real desire to have that conversation from our provincial partners at that time. One of the key reasons why I was opposed to transferring the land to the Saskatchewan Health Authority is we hadn't had anything firm in the ground of as far as when it was going to be operational, and we were giving away the land that they were going to be operating on, in my view, prematurely. One of the things that we had discussed as a tri-community was having the conversation around all of us doing our per capita share, at least in our area, to try and fundraise that, and then look at our private investors from around our communities to look into maybe potentially investing in this as well. The reason why I'm opposed to doing the 25,000 right now is I think that where we have it listed in our report from administration on the next steps is to notify the group and the partners of the decision of council. I think it's important for us, seeing this as this is something that is going to serve our tri-community. These discussions had already begun. If we can have that conversation first and make sure that our 25,000 is going to be per capita to what the other communities will put in the seed grant to start us on the right track, then I would be 100% on board. But I think that for us to put the 25,000 first is putting the cart before the horse, and that's the only reason why I'm opposed to it. Outside of that, I have no problem with us. I do have a problem with us investing in the long-term care, but that's a separate debate. If we are absolutely on the hook for FF&E, then I think that is our next step should be to discuss with our tri-community partners on how we come up with that money regionally, and then we start investing ratepayer dollars into that.
Councillor Hudisky?
Back in a time when I was chair of the Regional Health Board, we were working on an initiative of long-term care. It was a big issue in our community, and well, we only had 14 beds, and the need is just enormous. And basically, the study was catchment basin, and that's what I'm saying. If they did the study and there's a catchment basin, then we should be looking at that in terms of where the funding comes. And so I think that the work's already been done, and we just have to follow up on it.
Yeah, the intent would be at the end of the day what's going to come back at some point is the actual agreement that you'll be voting to approve, which would include the percentages. And if I mean, we'll certainly bring those concerns to the people that we're meeting with, but the discussion has essentially been, well, of course, it's gonna be no greater than if it was our percentage just based on the 3 communities, and it will come down based on how much other participation there is. How much though, I can't comment yet, because I haven't heard those numbers yet.
Okay, Councillor Retry?
And this seed money's just for security stuff, they know they have the funds available, right? So
Correct, and I think the partners, they haven't approached the seed funding based on a percentage, they just kind of thought all 3 of the major parties and the district is also
Alright.
discussing contribution, so that we get things going, but obviously the big piece is gonna be when that agreement comes back and there's a percentage laid out for you to look at. And I have communicated in advance of this that I wasn't super comfortable bringing this without that information yet, but they wanted to move this forward, so I'm presenting it on their behalf.
Okay. So, with this motion, are there any more comments?
So, that's good.
Okay,
enough for me.
so if we could take a vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Okay, so to break the vote, it's my vote, correct, or?
You always have the vote, Chair.
Okay, so, I'm in favor of the motion as well. Motion is carried. Okay, Councillor Richard, could you or someone call Councillor Clausen back in? Okay, moving on to the next item, in regards to home-based business, item 8.4, Mamir and Appears Daycare. There is a request for decision regarding this daycare.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is a development permit application for a home-based business, which is a discretionary use in the applicable R1 low-density residential district. The proposed home-based business use would provide daycare services at the property at 909 Senate Place. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Sanat, thank you. This application was dealt with at the August 16th council meeting, wherein council approved the recommendation for staff to proceed with processing. As such, the public notification process was undertaken and no input was received from members of the public. The proposed home-based business use would comply with the requirements of the town zoning bylaw, and staff are recommending approval of the development permit.
I'll move to approve the discretionary use application on lots 24 and 42, block 39, plan ADPA 19051.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that
Second.
motion? Okay, any discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to the next item, which is item 8.5 regarding a discretionary use, mixed-use development.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is a development permit application for a discretionary use related to a nail salon and spa use within the existing mixed-use commercial building located at 908 Laurent Avenue. This building is currently occupied by a flower shop, hotel, and cold beer and wine store. And the proposed nail salon and spa would occupy a small 240 square foot space in the building adjacent to Laurent Avenue that was previously used for storage purposes. It is noted that the proposed use complies with the list of permitted uses for the applicable C1 general commercial district zoning category as a personal service shop. The reason for the discretionary use application relates to the fact that the building in which the use is located is of a mixed use nature and is a discretionary use as defined by the zoning bylaw. And I believe you've seen previous applications for discretionary use as it relates to this property. The proposed use largely complies with the regulatory requirements of the zoning bylaw. However, given portions of the building and accessory parking are located on separate lots under common ownership, staff will be recommending that lots 4, 5, and 6 in Plan CN 1121 be amalgamated as a condition of approval of the development permit, should council be amenable to such approval. Staff are recommending initiation of the discretionary use application process in accordance with the town procedures. It is noted that a building permit and business license must be applied for and approved by the town once the development permit for the discretionary use has been issued. In this regard, the applicant and owner will be responsible to undertake construction of the required parking spaces on what is now Lot 6 before an occupancy permit couldn't be issued to ensure compliance with the town zoning bylaw. Please note that also there's a correction to the recommendation included in the staff report. There's a reference to lots 3 and 4, which should actually be lots 4, 5, and 6. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'll make a motion that council direct staff to initiate discretionary use application process.
Okay, do we have a second? Dirk?
Second.
Seconded, yes. Any discussion on that motion?
Yes.
This is already in use, right?
Councilor
Correct.
Bashara has the floor.
Does anybody else see just the absolute red tape that businesses are going through based on what our zoning regulations are? I just want to point it out that this is quite the rigmarole for a very small use, and I know that and the parking regulations, are these what the municipality should have in place? In my own position, I have experience having seen this firsthand, that every time a new small business tries to open up downtown, this is the process that they have to go through. And obviously our bylaw isn't very user-friendly if, per Councillor Clausen's comment, you know, it's not realized maybe at the time, or what have you, but I think that there's definitely room for improvement to not have to put such onerous requirements on small businesses, specifically with the parking. Is like downtown has a lot of street parking, and perhaps when we I think, okay, sorry, I don't really have too much of a point in my comment except to point out that this is an awful lot for one new small business with 3 spa chairs. But I'll kind of leave. And I did have a question, sorry. The amalgamation of the 2 lots, so that parking is one continuous lot. This is not sufficient to tie the lots, or are they not tied? Or what's...
Yeah, so right now you've got essentially one building per se with multi-uses in it that are spread over 3 legal lots of record. Now the lots are under one common ownership, so they're assessed as one, but from a legal perspective, they are 3 lots. And so when you try to assess the zoning regulations in the context of how do they apply to the individual lots, you run into some issues. Now I realize, especially as a newcomer here, that when I look at the downtown core and I see, you know, and I start to become familiar with some of the buildings, and you can see that, you know, this is not uncommon, which happens all over the place, where you see that certain decisions and things were happened, you know, several years ago. It's usually through these approvals processes. In this case that you've suggested, you know, it's a very small business, and this is the time to catch those sorts of things and correct them. If you continue to condone them, then they continue to be issues, and it puts staff in the awkward position, you know, when we're trying to make recommendations that there are other zoning nonconformities. And if I may elaborate a little bit further upon some of your comments about, you know, putting small businesses through extra process and what have you. And you know, once again, as a newcomer, especially to a new province here, I've come to learn through my short time being here that there is an exceptional amount of process that is involved with some of these things. And we go back to the last item, the business item, which was the home occupation, home-based business. I'm used to be some of my BC terminology, excuse me. And you know, and having to have these things come in every time to council and go through 2 separate council meetings, where it's going to take you, you know, upwards of 6 weeks to resolve, should only take really a day or 2. And that would, you know, the administrator and myself have been having some discussions about our options in terms of appointing you know, the development officer and having that stuff done at the staff level. Making sure that uses comply with the zoning bylaw, which is what the purpose of the development permit application really is. In this case here, we're talking about a nail salon and spa, which is already a permitted use in your zoning bylaw. So that leads us to the next thinking, which is, of course, because it's a mixed-use development, we're saying it's discretionary. So discretionary is a relatively new thing to me in the planning field. I realize it's something that's commonly used here in Saskatchewan, but typically, you know, what we do is we make very clear what is permitted in the zoning bylaw, and if it isn't, then it's something we have to consider as a separate case in amending the actual zoning bylaw. There's none of these little gray areas where you're having to come back repeatedly, have a public process, and then, you know, more time is spent trying to accommodate your businesses. So I think at some point down the road, in the not too distant future, I'd like to bring forward a report on some recommendations that I would have, with support of other staff, obviously, that would look at maybe making some changes to our zoning bylaw to try to improve some of the processes that we have, make them more efficient. And, you know, if there are difficulties, those difficulties can be focused on early on, and then we can deal with them.
Okay, Councilor Hudisky?
Yeah, I think, I agree with Abby, there is a lot of red tape, and there definitely has to be a process in place to, you know, there are, you know, parking issues, there could be fire issues, depending on the type of business goes in there, but those can be all done by administration. You shouldn't have to, if it's already a discretionary use building, an additional use, if it's permissible in that C1 area, administration should be able to do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
Councilor
just
Petrie?
one thing on the parking issue, like I don't even understand that, because even when you're down south, you know, if you gotta park 3 blocks away from where the nail spa, they go in, and that's what you do. So I don't get this whole parking spot issue.
Yeah, that's purely a function of how our bylaw is written, and it's parking minimums are kind of a big city thing that are put in place to make sure that there is parking available when you have to commute 30 minutes into town. But following up on my question, you discussed requiring the owner of the 3 lots to amalgamate the lots. Would a parcel tie not be sufficient instrument to do that, or do they have to go through the cost of a legal amalgamation?
That is a very good question, Councillor, and that's something I need to educate myself on when it comes to Saskatchewan process.
Yep.
So that's my own deficiency at this point in time.
Yeah, and I'm sure community planning, one call and they'll
Okay,
answer that.
I'd like to call the
Okay.
question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to the next item, 8.6, Building and Development Permit Report.
I have nothing to add, thank you, Mayor.
Okay,
To
So-
accept and receive and file.
thank you.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion arising from that? No? All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, 8.7, Ice Wolves Operating Agreement 2022-2023. There's a request for a decision.
I will declare conflict on item
Okay.
8.7.
Councilor McPhail declares conflict at 8:21. So we have the request, and we also have the Ice Wolves Operating Agreement itself being presented.
Connor, what are the changes from last year?
Just hold on to Councilor Clausen.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry we locked you in.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Clausen.
We haven't presented or recommended any changes from last year's operating
It's the same.
agreement. We did lay out the subsidy that's included with having that agreement. There wasn't a background as to where we landed on that $15,000. So it's important that we share, you know, the subsidy that we're approving by approving this operating agreement or not.
Okay, I'll move to approve the Ice Wolf operating agreement for 2022-23 season.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, that motion is open for discussion.
Yeah.
Councilor Bashar?
Yeah, just as a matter of, I know, you know, we have a lot of staff that are new in their roles and digging up agreements and not knowing where things came from and trying to figure that out and how it goes and doing those analysis. And I would personally like to see over the next year or season with the Ice Wolves playing, getting a real understanding of the benefit and the cost of the team here. We're looking at a Uniplex redevelopment potentially, and that weighs huge on the decision that we make, whether we're complying with SJHL requirements for the size and seating. Do the Ice Wolves bring what we, and you know, in a lot of people's hearts, feel they bring to town, and actually getting some evidence behind the decision making on subsidies and those kinds of contributions that the town puts towards the team, and you know, maybe it's a moral judgment call by councillors in the long run, but for me it needs to be based on some evidence. So continuing to support the organization right now, you know, I don't, nobody's armed with everything that they need to make those fulsome decisions, but I definitely would like to see from administration as we kind of get through the year, the collection of some of that critical data that will help us as councillors kind of see the bigger picture of how this impacts our community and our future planning and budgeting processes.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bouchard. Councillor Hordisky?
Yeah, I think all you have to do is look at the Ice Bowl's budget and you'll know 90% of those dollars are spent right in town here. And that's not counting the money that comes in from teams coming in and those kind of things. I've heard the number thrown out, but it's quite a contribution to the community. What I'd like to see is come up with a multi-year plan, do this year, and then work on something that be multi-year, so they know where they stand, we know where we stand. And if there's room to move, we can negotiate that.
Those are all great comments, and yes, we can certainly, the ISOs or the SJHL may be able to provide some info. There's definitely some sport tourism studies that have been done out there around tourism dollars generated for tournaments and, you know, game days and things like that. So we can provide a little bit more info, and maybe the ideal time is when we do look at a multi-year agreement, because you will be doing a multi-year commitment to a subsidy. And no different than, again, our main focus though outside of that, like our typical focus, I guess I should say, is here's the cost of offering, say, the ice per hour, approximately. And then it's a value statement from council is how much do you want to support minor hockey and subsidize youth sports? How much do you want to subsidize adult recreation, seniors, whatever entity it is in town? But we will try and give you all the information that you need to make those decisions.
Okay.
Further to your comments, Abby, I don't disagree that having a study and some data in front of us would be very beneficial, but there's also other benefits that having something like that brings to the community that can't really be measured on a data sheet or in a dollar number. Like some of the players' involvement in schools and the youth engagement piece.
Sure, but does it have to be hockey? Does it have to be, you know, this particular?
Well, it does when we're
franchise
talking
or-
about a ice wolf hockey contract.
So
Yeah.
further to Councillor Clausen's comment, I guess, just because you mentioned the involvement with schools and with youth, I think we really need to emphasize and share that if they are going to be present in schools and community events, that they need to be role models and they need to be something that instills pride in our community, and just, you know, passing on that message on a consistent basis is important. And that part would also include the violence that I've seen at some of the games, which I've actually did attend part of a game already this season, and I didn't see any, so I was quite pleased.
First
Councillor
game
Getchie?
is this Friday, but anyways, yeah, I've heard nothing but great things coming from the schools on the Ice Wolves attending there. So they do. The coach, that's his job, making sure they're representing the community and the team in a proper manner. And Kevin, he does an excellent job at that. So yeah.
That's great to hear. Councillor Hordisky?
Yeah, and I think dating back to pre-Ice Bowl days, minor hockey was dying off. It was it really bring the Ice Bowls in. Just the enrollment in minor hockey went up, and just that interest in getting kids out and getting them active, I think was huge. So
I think I come at it from a perspective of somebody who has not played hockey. I've played sports that were more affordable, and in a community where, you know, income levels don't always meet the provincial, you know, medians. Looking at things that are more accessible in a long term. So that's why I'm asking for evidence. You know, like I know Kidsport can pour all the money it wants into minor hockey, but does it always reach all of the people that may want to play a sport or want an opportunity, but it's just not accessible? So getting into the equity and you know, opportunities that we create through these investments, seeing evidence rationale behind that, not just because hockey is kind of elite, right? So just I'm wanting to be a bit of a devil's advocate on that. Not that I haven't supported the ice falls, not that I don't support them currently. It's just, it's really one of those things that is top of mind for me.
Okay, Councillor Vetri?
Yeah, just to assure you, Councillor Bashara, that, you know, they do make the hockey affordable. We got two great organizations. We got the Orange Ice Wolves Minor Hockey, and then we also got the JRMCC Minor Hockey as well. Two great programs, and they make sure if your kid wants to play hockey and you take him in, they're gonna get him in. So the elite thing is not. It doesn't happen, I don't feel, within this community. In the city, definitely the fees and that are a lot more expensive there, and I agree with you on that part.
Okay,
Here they've done a good job.
so let's call the question, as there's no further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Joseph, you're just very excited. I can see that. Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone, for that discussion. I think that was important. It's all important, but I think that was very important to bring forth. Next item, as Councillor McPhail rejoins us, is 8.8, and it is the Councillor by election report. There is a request for a decision in regards to an possible impending situation, right?
Pretty well guaranteed, I think.
I guess guaranteed, right, because no to anything that we need to know further in regards to that, other than the request?
I think it's a great idea to get it out there so people, you know, can plan and well, I fully support that. I make a motion we schedule the dates as presented.
I'll second that. Councillor
Okay.
Gradisky.
All right, any discussion on that item? Okay, calling the question, if we have a vote in regards to that. All in favor say aye, anyone opposed please say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody.
That
Next.
clock is doing at least 90 going across there.
Next item on the agenda is home-based business, MHR Viddy's Productions, request for decision. Councillor Vetri.
I'll move that council proceed with option A and direct staff to initiate the discretionary use application process for a home-based business known as MHR Viddy Eastie Production on lot 34, block 39, plan 80PA19051.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, calling the question, all in favor say aye, anyone opposed please say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item. 8.10, oh, it's not a touch screen, sorry. 8.10, town drainage works, request for decision around the town drainage works.
Yes, thank you. Administration is reporting back to council with regards to tender results on some works that were to be done. Just because of the late timing of the tendering and also the tight timelines of the airport work is our thoughts behind why we had low response and a very much over budget response. We've outlined there just some of the financial details, but essentially what administration is suggesting is that we defer the projects. We do have a $133,000 airport grant that they are not flexible on extending beyond the March deadline for spending. However, we have reached out to them and they said we are trying to strategize that if we can identify small amounts of works that we are going to offer up to our local contractors to do some work, that they will allow us to use grant funds towards that. So anything that we can parse out, we would, and at least that's our approach. But our thought was on a $2 million bid, you know, we could get better pricing and we more than make up the grant. We also did get a grant on the in-town works, but that one is much more flexible. There's no issue about when that work happens next year. So the recommendation is to re-tender and just proceed locally with anything that we can possibly proceed with.
Okay, Councillor Vetri.
Thanks for bringing this forward. It's too bad we can't get this done this year. you know, we were talking about fixing the speed bump on Studer Street and that, but are we gonna fix that before we get the drainage problem solved? That would be my concern.
Yeah,
Right,
to
'cause-
the council's question, this scope of work is intended to correct that issue, but like, not just, but like
Yeah.
that will be part of the scope of this work.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have the technical details to answer that question, unfortunately, our public works manager and consultant aren't on the line, but I do know that that is, that was mentioned as part of the scope.
Yeah,
of
because you
work.
talk about manholes, right, because they've been lifting up because of the poor drainage that we have and that, okay?
Okay, Council Herdisky?
Yeah, part of the problem with the speed bump is part of the problem that's on Robertson, because that water's flowing down there and creating all the infrastructure on the street to pop up.
Yeah, it's not going back
There's
into the
nowhere
bush.
for that water to go. You know, when there's nothing there, there was never a problem. But there's, you know, all the water comes off the hill and comes down that, you know, through that culvert that's popped up and ends up in that area, and it just saturated the whole area. If we're ever gonna fix it, it's gotta be extended beyond Robertson.
Okay.
Or else we're gonna have a continued problem.
Councillor Bashar?
Per administration's recommendation, I move to defer the 2022 drainage improvement capital works as presented.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that
I'll
motion?
second it. I'll second, but I have a, or sorry, Jordan.
Okay, so the motion is open for discussion. Councillor Betcher?
Just do another thing, do we right now have a bylaw about, like, for example, watering lawns all day long?
Nope.
Because there's always, you know, and I always go by Snot, right? And it's like, there's.
I'll turn it off.
I knew it was you.
Since Thomas was mayor, I've had this.
Well, and I'm not pointing fingers, and I don't know who it is. I haven't went and looked or anything. But there's this like continuous pool of water down there, and I'm not understanding why we need somebody needs to water their lawn all day long. You know?
It's gotta be green.
Right?
Lyle, so
And grass.
you're recommending to defer most of this till next year's budget, but still take advantage of what you can in the airport grant that was available?
Correct, so let's say we could do some grading and earthworks with some local vendors, and it might cost us 50 grand, and we can get 25, half of that paid for by the grant. At least we won't lose it all. I'm not sure what that number will end up being, but they're working actively on that behind the scenes right now.
All right, perfect. I'd like to call the question. All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed, please say nay. The motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to the next item is in camera. So I would like to request, if everyone agrees.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Missed
Oh, I'm sorry.
you missed
8.11.
811.
You got one more.
Downtown Revitalization Plan RFP. Request for decision from administration. Does administration have anything to add?
Nothing, will take questions if council
All right.
has any.
Any questions from council? No? Yes? Maybe?
I'll move that council proceed with option A to authorize entering into a contract with Scatliff and Miller and Murray for the development of a downtown revitalization plan, subject to a maximum contract value of $61,000 plus GST.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Okay,
How many people bid on it? Just one, or was there
Six.
multiple? There was lots.
Lots of interest.
Was there lots of spread?
Most of them, there was a high and a low, and most of them came in the mushy middle.
perfect, thank you. So, calling the question, all in favor say aye. Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Okay, moving on to our in-camera items. I would like for us to have a 5-minute recess if council agrees.
I'll make a motion to